This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. My subject is Eva Schubert. She's a Canadian singer and songwriter, and I'll be talking about her work as well as her interest in history, from which I found her. And so we will be talking once we return. This interview that I'm doing with a musician named Eva Schubert should be said brought to you by an ancient warlord, because I was looking up information upon not Attila the Hun, but his lesser-known older brother, Bleda the Hun, when I happened upon a series of 4 videos detailing the rise and fall of the Huns, and it was by this lady in front of you. And then I noticed after about the 3rd video that it said on her YouTube channel, Eva Schubert, and there was a musical note. And I said, what the hell is that? So I clicked on that. I said, oh, she's a singer. And so I listened to a number of her songs, and we'll talk about some of that. But welcome, Eva. I like to give my guests a few minutes to tell who they are, and what they're about. So how did a nice historian like you become a singer?
Hi, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a funny story because I've been doing history longer than I've been doing music. To back up, I'm based in Vancouver, BC, Canada. I've lived in some other places over the course of my life, but I keep coming back here for the mountains and the ocean. That's where I like to spend a lot of my time. And history is a long-term passion of mine. It started in my teens, even earlier, actually. I was the geeky kid nerding out on books about Henry VIII, reading Shakespeare, reading biographies of Julius Caesar, and like all these sort of fascinating, larger-than-life historical individuals. And that led into a history major as part of my first degree at university. So that goes back a long way. And as for the music part, I've been writing jazz, predominantly jazz, but not only jazz, and singing really for the past 7 years, seriously. Before that, I've been writing mainly poetry, but it wasn't something that I thought I had any sort of musical ability to combine with that. So the putting words together goes back a long way too, but it was only in the past 7 years that there was a musical edge to it as well. So that's kind of a more recent transition.
So let me just talk about your childhood. Are you Canadian? Because I noticed you say bean instead of bin, as we hear. So you are a native Canadian?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And so were your parents artists, or were they academics? Are
The
they?
truth is neither. But I will say that my father was incredibly well read. There was always an enormous library of books, not dissimilar to the one behind you that I see.
Yeah.
And I was just consuming whatever I could get my hands on as frequently as I could. So that was an excellent place to start. And my mother would take us on weekly library trips, and each of us had like a library duffel bag, and we would fill them up with books and come home and basically consume them. And then the following week on the same day, we'd go back to the library and refill. So that was definitely an important part of growing up. And my mother had a very strong emphasis on music and artistic education. She wanted her kids to have some training in my case, classical ballet, and hard to imagine, but I did 8 years of that. And in the case of some of my siblings, there were piano lessons or violin lessons, and so on. And she was the one who loved music and dance. So there were definitely strong elements of that growing up.
Well, you just, I was going to bring up something later when I was talking, but I've noticed that on a couple of your album covers, you're like, there's one where you're like in the edges of a lake and you're wearing a backless dress. And I said to myself, to go back in history, not as far as Blade of the Hun, but to go back about 25 years to a woman I was dating who was also a singer-songwriter. I could see that you have a very powerful upper body for a woman. You're muscled and you muscular back. And this woman was a gymnast. And I said to myself, I'll bet you Eva is a gymnast. But you just said you studied ballet, so that would account for that. Because this woman who was a gymnast said that she learned how to breathe by doing gymnastics well, and that helped her in her singing. So was doing ballet, has that helped you later on in your singing?
Um, absolutely, in a lot of ways. The 8 years of ballet began as a very young child, and it was sort of a formative physical discipline. You know, like you get used to working hard and sweating and feeling your muscles shake and that kind of pleasant soreness the next day. And it was something that I became addicted to. So there was a time when we couldn't afford ballet lessons anymore. My parents had a lot of children. I was the oldest, and it was hard enough to just kind of cover the basics, let alone some of this artistic stuff. So the ballet lessons had to stop for financial reasons. But by that time, I was about 13, and I'd already been very much shaped by those years. So I started going to the gym, and I've never stopped. And I got into weightlifting shortly after that,
Uh,
probably 14, 15. And weightlifting has been a major part of my physical discipline ever since. And I'm still very much into it. So, you know, pull ups and chin ups and deadlifts and squats and, you know, all that good stuff. Lots of heavy dumbbell work. And actually, it's funny where you started with this because I made a post about this on Instagram just yesterday. There was a picture from a recent photo shoot I did, and as usual, every time I do one of these things and I'm wearing something that shows my back, there's always some laughter between me and the photographer because I turn around and it's like, what the heck are those traps doing? It's just not what people expect to see when you see a woman in like some feminine lacy dress and she turns around and there are these, you know, muscular bulges there. And I've gotten used to it. I'm at peace with it, but I know that it surprises people.
oh, it wasn't anything negative. It's just like I said, from the back. She didn't have red hair like you, but I said, "Boy, she looks a lot like this gal." And I bet you, my first thought was, I bet you she was a gymnast, but I was close. Ballet is, and you said the weights, but so one of the things I've done a number of shows on interesting websites and YouTube channels, and I'm always disappointed when I see quality stuff not getting it. I mean, your channel's been on, it looks like, a couple of years. It looks like, with just as with my channel, I get maybe a few hundred to maybe a few thousand views over a few years. So I would make the assumption that you have a day job, that especially with COVID, you're not, the singing has dried up. So do you do a day job, and you know
Yeah, you know, that's funny. That's actually the reason why I only got into music, you know, in the last 7 years is because coming from where I did growing up, my parents worked really hard to kind of make ends meet. And so very early on, I thought, you know, I need to get myself to university and I need to do something sensible, you know, so that I've got a sound financial foundation for supporting myself and taking care of other people in my life. So I went into university, did a first degree, did a second degree in London, and specialized in education. So my day job actually involves teaching at a college, and
mm,
I've been doing that for quite some time. So when I got into the idea of doing a history podcast, it came really easily because I've been, you know, talking in front of people and organizing my thoughts in a pedagogical format for a very long time. And now it was just a matter of taking that and applying it to something that's a long-term passion of mine. So yes, I've got a day job,
mm,
um, and it's something that I feel very lucky to be able to balance because it's a job that I enjoy, but it also gives me space to do these other things in my life. And I know that there are some people that have jobs that give them the financial stability they need, but they don't have a lot of time for anything else. And then there are other people that are totally devoted to their art, but they struggle financially, particularly in the last year.
mm.
I know friends and acquaintances that are full time musicians, and that was their only source of income, and it's a grim picture. So I feel lucky in that respect.
Um, so you live in the Vancouver area, right? Vancouver, the city, not the island, but this is
That's
very
right.
close.
Yeah.
So, is Canada, in a sense, a bit more open-minded than America? In America, everything is so goddamn dumbed down. The only thing we get are these auto-tuned singers now. Uh, there's I did a show with a young kid who does music reaction videos, and he's one of these teenagers. He's quite intelligent, and he reacts to a lot of the stuff from his dad's age in the 60s and 70s. Um, is there no like local jazz station or radio station that would want to play your stuff? I mean, do you get any airplay locally?
It's funny. I mean, I do get airplay. I was in the past couple months that someone told me they heard me in the UAE, like the United Arab Emirates. They have a station there. There's a station in the Caribbean that was playing my stuff, and there's a wonderful jazz show in the UK that's done quite a regular playing of jazz songs that I do. In Vancouver, there is a jazz scene, but it's a lot smaller than in other places. Um, I mean, there's one major jazz club that I can think of that does regular quality live jazz acts, and then a couple of really small little bars and cafes that sort of have occasional things, and that's it. Um, so it's funny. I mean, it I the people that listen to my music and the people that play it, they come from all over the place. Probably the biggest majority of them from Italy right now,
Uh-huh.
which is a place that I actually went and played jazz live a couple of years ago, and I hope to go back and do that again. But it's this weird sort of globalized, connected and disconnected feeling that there is around it.
Yeah, I know it's odd. My website, when I could trace where fans were outside of the English-speaking world, there was the African kingdom of Lesotho, and then there was like the Indian state of Sikkim. So people way up in the mountains and way out on the plains somewhere, a few of them were reading my website, and I'd get like 35, 40 hits a day, and I'm like, what kind of maniacs are in these little countries reading an arts website? But it's just kind of funny. Um, uh, let's talk a little bit about your growing up. You mentioned poetry, and you mentioned doing the ballet stuff, and your parents weren't, you said, particularly artistic. So what first hooked you into the arts? Was it the ballet? Was it poetry?
I would say it was poetry, and I can actually nail it down to a particular moment in time in a particular poem. So I had a friend who was going to a private school,
Mhm.
and so the curriculum there tended to be more rigorous and more demanding, sort of across the board. And she needed help because she had dyslexia. So things like poetry and sort of creative and non-literal uses of language were really a struggle for her. So she would often, bring her literature homework to me and say, "Help me understand this." So I think I was 14 at the time that she brought me the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock
Uh,
by
Elliot.
Eliot.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with it. I
Yeah.
mean, going over and sort of unpacking the layers and the sound of the language and its internal rhythms and the way that the syllables flowed together. There were so many layers of magic to it.
Mhm.
And I mean, I was already writing poetry because I'd gotten into Shakespeare really early. So I was trying to write, sonnets and iambic pentameter with heroic couplets and all that sort of thing. I mean, I'd been writing that for a long time, but when I found Eliot, I thought, oh, this is something else. And so I got into poetry in a big way. And I would say that without those years of poetry and sort of dwelling in that space and the things that poetry does to us emotionally and the innovative things it does to language, I don't think that I would necessarily be doing music because the blossom of music came directly from that poetic root. They're completely interconnected, and I can't imagine doing one without having done the other first.
It's interesting because usually when in my years, I mean, I'm a poet and my wife is, and I used to run a poetry group for 8 years when I lived in the Twin Cities. When I come across young women, almost always they were exclusively reading female poets, which isn't bad, but it gets into that kind of Sylvia Plath, Emily Dickinson thing where they never get out of that or never move past that to other poets, male or female. So other than Eliot, what other poets were you reading? Were you reading any translations like Rilke or the
Yes,
Russians?
In fact, there's a translation of Rilke's Book of Hours that is one of my most prized possessions.
Who's the
Poetically.
translator?
There are a couple of women. There were two women, and I don't
Oh,
remember
okay.
their names off the top of my head. I could probably find it
No,
for you. It's
no,
upstairs on my shelf. But
that's
I mean, it's hard enough to get poetry when it's written in its own language,
yeah.
but to make it magical when you're translating is really an act of alchemy. And this book pulled it off. So that's just amazing. So yes, Rilke. Also, oh my goodness, my brain is just absolutely going for a blank. The Victorian poet writes in memoriam, writes The Lady of Shalott, Tennyson.
Oh, Tennyson.
Tennyson was a major influence because his writing is so musical.
Yeah.
That's the thing I love about the way he puts together not just the images and the content, but the beauty of the language itself. And one of the things that I find with some much more contemporary work is that it tends to be more cerebral, and that lyricism and musicality in the language itself can be less important.
Yeah.
But I love that. And it's critical, I think, for good songwriting as well, because you have to have some lyricism, you have to have rhythm, you have to have rhyme. And so Tennyson is one of the places that I learned how to do that. And I memorized some of his work. I mean, it was just brilliant.
Well, saying that memorize, it reminds me of that scene in the Anne of Green Gables miniseries with Megan Follows, where she's in the rowboat and it's sinking, and she's which
the Lady of Shalott.
Right?
The Lady of
Shalott. The Lady of Shalott. Yeah. And one of these days, I swear, I met Megan Follows 25 years ago when she was doing a play in the Twin Cities. One of these days, I'm going to interview her. But I can't get the contact her. But anyway. She's another underappreciated Canadian artist. So when you were talking about the poetry, I think that's an interesting thing, because one of the things I wanted to point out, well, I will point out in one of your songs that they say the speaker, the singer of the song, is not talking about how she feels, but how others are reacting to her, and that's. And right there, as an artist, as a critic, and as a poet, I'm saying, okay, this is a good lyrical approach, because it's reversing. Instead, you're getting an obverse view into the person's soul rather than them coming from behind the eyes. And that's an interesting twist. And that tells me that you're a smart person and you know what you're doing when you're writing lyrically.
Well, thank you for noticing the difference in the approach. And it was a fun song to write. I mean, there are a lot of laughs in there, and some of that is actually based on actual events. I mean, I was in the park one day, and there was a man and his wife on their bicycles, and they did call out and make a comment. And it was just one of those moments where you kind of think, well, is this actually happening? Yeah. And so it was too good to pass up. I had to put it somewhere. So that was the song.
See, that's one of the things when I write, like when I was writing the Blader play, things that happen to me in life. You can write about yourself, but one of the problems with art across all of the arts, and certainly starting with confessional poetry, is that every little fart someone makes, every little thing that goes wrong, they obsess about it rather than taking little things and pastiching them together to make a bigger whole. And so you end up getting, and someone like Sylvia Plath, who is supremely talented, could get away with obsessing on herself. But someone who's not as skilled as Sylvia Plath, it's just going to come off as self-indulgent and childish and whiny. Whether we're talking about song lyrics, for example, I mean, I'm not big on contemporary music, but I know someone like Taylor Swift is actually a pretty good lyricist herself, except her songs are just so puerile in a lot of ways in terms of the obsessions. And that's why when I just discovered you accidentally, I was like, boy, wouldn't it be nice if you were the person who, or even if you could just steal 1 million or 2 of her album sales to get it out there, not just to make yourself richer and be able to do more, but it's the idea of getting out there to an audience and any artist, because I've always said art is translating reality. You've got someone, you know something. One of the bone mows I hate about art is when people say art is there to ask questions. Well, I say, fuck that. Melville didn't write Moby Dick to ask a question. He had the answers. They're there. You have to get them. And now, I'm preaching. Let me talk here. Now, I said about with something like they say. You said you took this interesting little moment and used it in the song. Uh, how much of your own songs are based upon things like you have a song like "The Brawl" about some guy? Are these past flames, or are these just situations that in your mind you said, well, Billie Holiday did a song like this. What if I shifted the parallax of what she's talking about in this manner?
Um, I don't think it's exclusively one category or the other.
Yeah.
A lot of songs will emerge from experiences I've had or people that I've known, and The Brawler is definitely a character sketch that's based on a real person, which of course you then add some artistic flourishes and then you have some jokes in there and so on. But there are other songs that I've written for other people, not for them, but inspired by them, because when you can really see what it would be like to walk in someone else's shoes, when you really pay attention to what's going on in someone else's life, it's not hard to write from that perspective either. And so sometimes songs come from there, where I'm looking at a situation up close that may not be in my life, but it's in someone else's life that I know about, and that stimulates a train of thought or a strong emotional impulse that becomes the seed of the song. And then, of course, there are things that you do that are influenced by the jazz tradition as well, and that might be part of the stylistic approach to how you express those ideas or those thoughts. So it's a mishmash of things for sure.
So Eva, I want to talk a little bit about actual singing, and I don't have the vocabulary of singing. So, what is your voice? Are you a soprano?
I've been told that, although I would say that the register that I sing in most often doesn't sound very soprano-y because I tend to keep it. I think I like the lower, huskier register, especially for jazz. So I tend to sing down there a lot.
And again, I don't know the vocabulary. One of the things I noticed is that I think you sing your songs better than you do when you do covers because you know how to write to your own voice. And when you do that, when you're talking about the huskier, I would call it sort of like, again, as a layman, your voice is very good in a fugue-like singing. When you're changing up so quickly, like you don't have a belter's voice. You're not someone who you're not going to do the Celine Dion, Whitney Houston kind of thing, but you know how to write to your own voice. Now, I think for me, the best cover that you did, and I'll say the one that I didn't think worked was the Vincent one, but the best one I thought was the Annie Lennox "Sweet Dreams," and the reason was because Vincent is a very delicate song and it has a lot of twists and turns vocally, but with the Annie Lennox song, what you did was instead of having that what is it, synthesizer, the synth throughout, and just having a voice play off of that, you made it more jazzy. And I noticed you placed the emphasis on the phrasing differently than she did. When I've heard other versions of it, it's usually somewhat more synth, or somewhat more rocking, and the lyrics were easier to decode. If someone had never heard the Annie Lennox Eurythmics original, they could hear the lyrics more. So let's talk about when you do other songs, covers, and then your original songs. Would you agree with me that you have a voice that's better within sort of that fugue where you're whatever you'd call it?
Yeah, I don't think so far that I've come anywhere close to belting anything, and it's one of those things where as a vocalist, which is kind of a secondary thing that I've been developing, right? I started music primarily as a songwriter, so I was interested in writing the songs, and then trying to deliver them. But it's become obvious to me that to continue to develop, I need to work on my vocal technical ability and range and strength and control and all these things. So it's something I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of years. And yeah, belting. I mean, I've tried, and I'm working on practicing different numbers to try and get that, but it doesn't come easily, and it doesn't come naturally at all. Similarly with super high ranges, I mean, I can do it, but it doesn't feel comfortable. So where I'm happiest vocally, and I think where I get the best sound, is a very natural range for me. It's in the lower register, and I can play around with scat and with adding different notes and playing around a melody. But that's a different style. It's not so much about soaring to the heights. It's not about belting. It's a different emphasis, and I think that that's so far what I like doing the most. Is there room for growth? I'm sure there is. I'm working on it, but I would agree that it comes off best in my songs because I am writing from my voice. I'm singing as I want to sing. I'm not singing as someone else has suggested the song should go. So it's easier.
Yeah, there's another song of yours, and I'll if, with your permission, play a little bit of these and touch on them in a bit more. The song "Traces of You" has a very 1930s Great Depression feel to it, and I could see. Well, was there a singer named Ma Rainey or something? Something I could see like you know, and not that you're trying to imitate black singers, but I could see there. Who was the playwright who did Fences? The black August Wilson. I could see that being a song in an August Wilson kind of play.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, there are quite a number of songs on that very first album, which is where Traces of You. Is it the first or the second album? Oh.
I think it's the second one.
Second one, yeah, that's right. Well, there are definitely a few of the jazz songs I've done that I really think, oh, you know, this sounds like a Nat King Cole song. I can hear Nat King Cole singing it. In fact, They Say, which we spoke about earlier, sounds to me like a very Nat King Cole kind of thing. And definitely Traces of You, I agree, is got a 1930s feel. And there's a very deliberateness about that, you know, because I grew up listening to classical jazz, and when I say classical, I mean, you know, the Rat Pack and Ella and Nina Simone and Billy and all these people. And so I have a love for that really, I want to say acoustic feel, you know, where you don't have the reverb and the auto tune and the synthesized backgrounds that are so often a part of contemporary music production, where it's like, no, you got a real trumpet, and that's what it sounds like. And there's a real piano over there, and there's a vocalist, and there's not a lot of stuff. There are, you know, 4 or 5 instruments maybe, and they're interacting, but there's a quality of sound that you get from that it sounds vintage, because we don't do it that way so much these days. Even when you do have a quartet or whatever in there, we're in there with our production, and we're kind of smoothing things out, and we're adding, you know, we're extending notes and doing all this. So in style and also in composition, I really love that old school jazz. And so especially the first album or two, that was very much in the front of my brain when we were looking at arrangements and how to deliver those songs.
Yeah, the first album you did, I thought the songs are good, but I think there's a quantum leap upward in the second album, which 10. I mean, I think that's really, and I'm not saying that just to kiss your ass. I think that's really a great album. And the EP you put out after that also, the songs, there's the second album, you get a more country flavor. There's some songs that remind me of the songs from "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou." They have a 1930s, you know, down by the river kind of feel. Well, if you don't mind, I just want to play a few, you know, maybe 10 seconds of a few of these songs here, just to give a sense. Like, so we got Backcountry, Borderless Sky is the titular song from the second album. So let me just bring that up here. So,
if you asked why, how could I explain? But to say that your kiss is is my desert rain. In your arms, I dream open eyes, music of water and borderless sky.
Now, right there, just lyrically, to dream opened-eyed. So there you get just lyrically an inversion. Now, someone listening to the song, it has that nice sort of flow in it, and it sounds like a typical love song. But there's a number of places there where lyrically you throw something in. To dream open-eyed, is logically it doesn't square if you're thinking about it logically, but as you're going along. Those are the kinds of little things that someone who's smart as a lyricist will slip in. And I'll tell you, it's very difficult to find that in even the best lyricists, because oftentimes, like I would think of someone like Jim Morrison from The Doors. He was a much better song lyricist than a poet, because with lyrics, that's a good example where you get a little poetic moment slipped in there that's being carried along by sort of the rush of the music. And so a song like that, where did that come from? And if you have any comments on what I just said.
Yeah, I definitely have some comments on what you said. I have an ear for people who are focusing on their lyrics. Like, one of my favorite lyricists is Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Because of exactly that. I mean, some of his lyrics are just razor sharp, and they're so wickedly constructed that you can turn that phrase over in your mind several times, and you see something different every time. And I love finding lyrics like that. So if I can predict where the line ends before I've even heard it for the first time,
Yeah.
I'm bored. And a lot of pop lyrics drive me crazy because there aren't even actually very many words, and you've heard them all before, and the rhymes are like so cliched.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, I'm hearing this pop song, and I've heard the first two lines, and you're only going to have 4 more lines. You're just going to sing them 30 times, and I'm going to hear the same line again and again. And it's just, I mean, for me, cognitively, it's just, it's very, very boring. And so I don't like lyrics like that, and I really don't like writing things like that. If I can't bring something that's fresh to it, then I feel like I've failed. Like, there's got to be something beautiful in the delivery of your message. It's not just that, oh, I'm writing a song about being in love, or I'm writing a song about this moment. The vehicle itself that you construct to deliver that message has got to be attractive. And that's about style, and that's about language. So this song in particular, it really was kind of, I mean, there's a lot of poetic stuff in there that goes back to my status as what one friend once called me, an obscure medieval creep, which I thought was a hilarious turn of phrase, because you can see that I was reading Tennyson. I mean, the Garland of Fools.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not a phrase that's in everyday circulation, right? Where does it come from? Well, it comes from the mishmash of ideas and influences, many of which are quite old, that are in my poetic imagination. And it's like, well, the Garland of Fools. It's kind of like the dunce cap, but it's prettier,
Well,
so.
You can take ideas that have been used before that aren't necessarily cliche. It's how you put them together in what sequence. There's a fellow who is a really great poet at his best, but he doesn't have any clue how he does it. He can't sit down and write a great poem because he knows what he's doing. It's one of those things that comes to him. And he one time wrote this really great 10-line poem that was nothing but cliches, but the cliches were smashed together in such an odd way that it wasn't cliched. So if you take a love line, for example, and write in it a poem about a bombing in the war in Syria, it might have a new resonance that it doesn't have in the love poem. Let me go to another song here. I mentioned this one here. This is the Brawler one, and this is quite different from Bottomless Sky here. So let me just.
Probably the third album.
Yeah.
He's a big city boy, likes to go to the limit. When there's a problem, he knows how to spit
So when you use even a term like he knows how to spin it, that's that's a that's an that's a word to spin it, to spin a deal. Even in just that first little verse there, you get some a displacement of what might be expected. Because you're talking brawler, you're thinking about a guy who's gonna be dragging his woman by like a caveman by the hair kind of thing, but you get an intelligent rendering of the supposed woman the character you're portraying in there about this person. And in the video you're doing your snarling thing, you're crinkling up your nose, and and so that there's a pugnacity to that that's missing in the other in the first song that I played. So a song like that, you said that was based, I guess, on an ex-boyfriend or someone you might have dated or something, but you bring something smart to it. How do you make the lyrics and the song come together in one, or is there one thing that sets you off? Because sometimes I wrote this long novel one time, and when I got it starts with a mafia guy killing another mafia guy and saying something to him, and once I got what he said in that ear, the rest of the book came, and I knew I had it. Is there a moment like that when you said, "Oh, I got to write a song about Joey"? But it was this incident that sparked the song.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. It can come in one of a couple of ways. So usually when it's poetry, and sometimes a lot of times songs start this way too, it'll be a phrase or a couple of words that'll start rattling around in the back of my brain, and it might just be just a phrase, and it just starts to kind of it's like a neural itch. It's kind of back there and it's bouncing around, and it's just a combination of 3 or 4 or 5 words. But when it starts agitating like that in the back of my mind, I know that I need to sit down and turn my attention to that part of the brain, because there's something in there that wants to sprout. And so that will be the seed for lyrics or verses a lot of times for me. But since since the music started in the last 7 years, sometimes it happens the other way around. And then I had this experience just last week, actually. I went down to a lovely city park right around the corner from where I live, and there was this fellow there beside the lake, and he had a trumpet and he had a boombox, and the boombox had some kind of backing track, and I think he was Portuguese. At least he was speaking Portuguese, so he could have been Brazilian or Portuguese, one of the two. But he was singing to this backing track, and then he'd stop and he'd play his trumpet to the backing track, and he'd sing. And I couldn't understand the words, but it had the magic of fado music, which I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with fado? Okay,
No.
so it's a musical genre that comes out of Portugal, and I remember listening to it live when I visited Lisbon. You would go through these cobblestone streets at night to these little fado bars where people would be drinking wine and they'd be listening to this live music. And typically it would be a woman, an older woman singing, and there would be a guitar player, maybe two, and one other person. So it would be really small little trios or quartets, and they'd be singing live in these little fado bars. And it's a very melancholic musical tradition. It's beautiful, but it's melancholy. And there's this soulful vocal and this kind of beautiful Mediterranean guitar backing. So I love fado. I was at the park on this day. I've been toying with the idea of I'd like to write something that was fado-esque, because the tones are different, the notes are different, the style is different, but I love the feeling that it communicates. So this guy was singing, and it was very fado to me, to fado sounding to me. So I walked away after listening to him for a while, and I just fixated on one or two musical notes that had really stood out to me. And I just began to hum those notes because I was like, this is the right starting place. Because writing a melody is kind of like connecting a bunch of dots on a line. If you start on the right dot, there are a bunch of other dots, call them notes, that are accessible to you from there. But if you don't start on the right dot, if you start on a different dot, maybe a lower dot, you're never going to get to these notes up here because there's just no logical connection between them. So when I heard these notes from this guy, I was like, if I just start on this note right here and just start playing from there, I played with it the whole way home. It was a 15-minute walk. I was just focusing on that note and then building a melody from there. And before I went to bed, I'd written the whole song. So what happened was I wrote the chorus melodically, and then I thought, okay, now what are the melody lines that lead into this? What's the verse? So I wrote that, and this is me singing basically and making voice notes so I can remember and refer to what I've just kind of put down. So when I was happy with that, then I thought, well, now I need words that can inhabit these sounds, that make sense given the emotional connotation of these sounds. And so I wrote the words, and that's how that song happened. And that was literally a week and a half ago. So that's an example of where the music started it.
So I want 2 points that I make, and this is the kind of interview I like, because sometimes I have very smart people who I can talk to, and they have a book about economics or this or that, and it's interesting, but they're so focused on things. With you open up, you're a good interview because you're opening up some things. And 2 points I wanted to make on what you just said is, number one, since you know about poetry, what you described there about you said the notes, there was no logical connection, but yet you did make that connection. That brings me to John Keats and his idea of negative capability, which is that to take two things that are not necessarily connected, but once you make that connection, they seem like they've always been connected in some fashion. And so there, whether you knew it or not, you're telling me about an ability that very few people have, in that you can make this negatively capable leap of two seemingly disparate things that are connected, but it takes that person to point the finger there. And secondly, I was thinking about a video I'd seen a few months ago talking about Western musical theory versus other cultures' musical theories. And specifically, there was a video that there was an Indian, a woman who is an Indian musician, talking about how they appreciate the Mozarts and the Beethovens and etc., but how they don't use the same, I guess you would call it musical lineation. Number one, what I said about negative capability, do you have a comment? And number two, when you think about songs, are you seeing them on a board sometimes, or do you write your songs out in musical notation, Western musical notation, or is it just more intuitive?
I'll start with the second one first. I can find, like, I have a keyboard, I can find a melody on the keyboard, and I can write down, I can say, oh, this is it. It goes from, C to A, to G, and so on. So I can do that, but that's not where it starts. It starts with an intuitive sense of what notes can follow the one I've just sung. And that's kind of the same feeling you need to do scat. Like, if I want to do a scat section on a song, whether it's a song I've written or I want to do scat on, a jazz cover like Lush Life, I put a scat session into a little impromptu a cappella cover I did of that a few months ago. And in order to do that, you have to know, okay, if I'm at this note, and this note is given to me by the song, because it's in the melody of the song, I want to do scat. So now I want to do some notes that aren't in the song, but they have to be related to the notes that are in the song. Because I'm basically, if you think of the song as a path through the forest, okay, you can think of other notes as sort of little rocks that are on either side of that path. So you can jump a little ways off that path to this note, and you can go from this note to another note that's kind of closer to it than the original path. But at some point, you have to find your way back to that path, which is the melody notes you started with. And so there's freedom there, but there's also, you are constrained by needing to find your way back at some point. And so you have to know, if I'm starting with this note, which is an A, there are a certain number of notes that are going to be logical places to go. And there might be 5 or 6 or 8 of them that are options. But each of those options I take sort of further lays out a path from there. And so you have to have that ability to say, okay, well, I want to go here. Where are we going to go next? I don't know. We're going to go here, there, 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 there. Oh, and then we're going to end up back where we started. So that's kind of how that happens. In terms of, you called it negative capability. Are we talking about
John Keats called it negative capability, but
yeah.
that's
Are we talking about Keats the poet, or is
yeah.
it another guy who has the same name?
Keats, John Keats, yeah.
Yeah, John Keats the poet. Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny because I've read some of his work, but I don't remember reading this particular way of putting it. But it's an interesting idea. You don't know that it's going to work until you try it.
Yeah.
But when it works, it's as though you couldn't have made any other choice.
Exactly.
Right? It's sort of like putting together two pieces in a puzzle. You're like, I think this is one going to fit. And sometimes you put them together and it looks like they fit, but they don't actually. And you have to know that that's the wrong choice. But once you put the one in that does fit, you realize that no other thing could have really gone there that way. So I think we get there by trying. And a lot of times it is intuitive. Mm-hmm. You kind of don't really know if it's going to work. I'm standing here, I'm going to grab that thing and try and connect them. And if you land there and it works, it's like, we pulled it off, Mm-hmm. But you never really know if it's going to until you land it.
I know when I was writing poetry, I would describe writing of a line as I'm writing a line, and let's say maybe I'm using an acrostic, which is maybe where all the first letters spell something, or a telestic, which is the last letter spell something, but I'd have a frame, and I might write. You limit yourself, but by limiting yourself, you're also freeing yourself in another way. And like if you're playing the slots on a machine, you're coming up cherries and whatnot. So each word influences the next one, and it closes down some possibilities, but it opens up another. Or if you're writing a story, it's like going into a house where every door you open, there's two rooms, but that at a certain point, you have to start limiting yourself, and each choice limits yourself so that you have the full arc. And that was just going through my mind as we were talking. Eva, if you said you were going to tell me a little bit of a story, we made a comment off air here. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it comes from your comment because you were saying, oh, well, you're actually quite intelligent, and it made me laugh because I find that the expectations around intelligence or lack thereof are very much conditioned by what people find out first about me, right? So I kind of have these two hats, right? I have the academic hat. Mm-hmm. So I'm a college instructor. I'm a history podcaster. It's kind of very, very bookish and nerdy, if you like. And then there's the other hat, which is I'm a jazz singer and a songwriter. Let's call it the artist hat. So both of those things are true about me. But when I meet people for the first time, it's often up to me how I want to introduce myself, right? Which hat am I going to wear first when I introduce myself? So there was this one time in my first or second year of music, and I was doing my first or second music video. And I needed to find someone a man who could dance, like really, really well, because this music had dance choreography in it, like partner dancing. And so I had two criteria. He needed to know how to dance well, and he needed to be a certain height, because otherwise it was going to look really awkward on camera, seeing as I'm quite tall. So anyway, I was interviewing various candidates for this. And so I was meeting people, and all they knew about me, these gentlemen, was that, I'm a woman and I'm a jazz singer and I'm doing this music video that has dancing. So I met one of them, and he's a lovely guy, but that was all he knew about me. So we met up, we had a glass of wine, we were going to talk about the project. And in the first 15 minutes, we just started with some small talk, and we got into diasporic cultures and history and syncretism and all these kinds of things. And he sort of looked at me after 15 minutes and he said, "Oh, you're actually quite smart." And I had to laugh because I've worn the bookish, nerdy academic hat all of my life. So I'm sort of used to people assuming a certain level of education and intelligence about me. And it was very amusing for me to realize that I was in a situation where, because I had opened wearing the artist hat, that people sort of assumed I was a bit of a flake, mm-hmm. and were somewhat surprised to find out that might not be accurate. And so I realized at that moment, I was like, oh, okay, it really does depend how I introduce myself. And these are assumptions that some people are just going to make. if I lead with that. So, it's something I can have some fun with.
Well, I didn't imply that you weren't smart in any way.
No, no,
I could have divined that you were intelligent by just listening to 3 or 4 of your songs, which I want to get back to. And I wanted to read the first 4 lines of a song of yours called "Water," uh, and then I'll play a little snippet. And I'm assuming these are correct lyrics. It says, "I need your lips like water. I crave your touch like bread, and every day I hunger, no matter how much I've been fed." So those are the lyrics to the song.
yeah.
But I crave your touch like bread. The interesting thing is that it could be the speaker wanting to touch bread, to be grounded in something that they consume to keep themselves going, or to crave the touch like bread, as if the person is touching them with a bread-like touch that somehow is transferring some kind of essence vitae or something to the singer. And let me just, since they're the first one, let me just play the water here so we can hear that here. Hold on. Let's see.
Need your lips like water. Crave your touch like bread. Every day I'm good. That I how much I've been fed.
Now that song is a good example of that. Again, as a layman would say, it has a kind of fugue, dreamlike quality, and I think your voice there is especially it's almost as if you've seen like photographs of a supernova and then the second shell. So you have the shell of the music and then the shell of the voice resonating within the music. Again, this is a layman. I don't have the vocabulary. So how does a song like that, "Water," come about?
That's a funny one. So I'm just going to comment, first of all, with that wonderful metaphor that you gave about a supernova, is that it very much felt that way to sing it.
Uh-huh.
Like there is a dreamlike, floating, soaring quality that even happened in the studio during the take. And it didn't take, I mean, that one was laid down very fast. I didn't have to sing it more than once or twice, and the producer's like, "I think we got it, that's it, that's the one." So it came very naturally, and that song began as a piece of poetry, and it began as something that I played on with my guitar for a while to kind of figure it out, and that was when I added things like those soaring non-verbal vocal bits, the hey 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 stuff that happens in there. And it was really a fun song to record because I didn't really know what to do with it. It wasn't jazz, at least not in my conception of jazz. I didn't have any of the jazz notes or conventions or anything recognizable about it, but I really loved the lyrics and the repeated different water images that are in that song. I mean, there's a thing about ships and shipwrecks. There's bread and water. All these sort of things. And so I brought it in, and I wasn't really sure if it belonged on the EP because everything else on that EP was very jazzy. You have Brawler and you have Sweet Man and these kinds of songs with the trumpets and the popping, sizzling jazz sort of feel. And this song wasn't any of those things, but it was kind of a surprise gift to work on, and it became a favorite track. I know my producer, it was his favorite one on the album, and mine too. And it was sort of, we didn't really know how it was going to come out when we took it in to work on it and record it. And it was something that began with an idea and a feeling that was in the song to begin with, and then the other musicians that worked on it, Mike Kavalerchik, who did the guitar, he really did a beautiful job amplifying that. And he did this finger picking rhythmic technique that you can sort of hear in the background. It's very delicate, and it almost feels like water dropping. When I hear that guitar plucking rhythmic background that he does, it almost has the feel of raindrops on a lake. And so the other people in the studio did a beautiful job of picking up on the essence of that song and amplifying it in the interpretations that they brought to it as well.
Let me just get away from music for a moment, and then we'll get back to it. Just want to ask a few questions outside of that. Number one, just regarding your singing voice. One of the things I did notice the difference between when you do your history videos and your singing voices, like a lot of singers, especially English singers, or even if you were Rammstein or the Scorpions, German rock groups, they often sing in an American accent. It seemed like your accent changes a little bit, not as dramatically as Klaus Meine of the Scorpions, but what is it about contemporary music in the world that everything sort of defaults to a Midwestern American accent?
Well, okay, those are two different questions, because the first question is why do I do it, and the second question is why do other people do it. So it's easier for me to answer the first question.
Okay.
The first question is that I'm blessed or cursed with a very acute ear for accents, and it sometimes causes me some embarrassment. I get it from my father, who could pull off a German accent or an English accent at the drop of a hat, and often amused us as children by doing that. And I've inherited this ability to understand, like, what makes an Irish accent Irish. So I'd be sitting with a good friend of mine who came from Ireland and her family, and after half an hour having a cup of tea with them and speaking like this, it wasn't something I planned on, but it was just sort of a thing that happened. And my voice would be imitating the register and the pronunciation of the people around me without me even consciously attempting it. And it would be very difficult after a while because they'd look at me and wonder what happened, right? And so sometimes I have to consciously put a brake on that, because I can slip into it if I'm just surrounded by a strong accent whose contours and differences are very visible to me. I'll sort of, without thinking about it, begin to absorb some of that, and so that's what can happen. And I've had people ask me many times, including in Vancouver, where I'm from, because even still, sometimes my pronunciation and my rhythm can be somewhat fluid, and it can sort of shift. So that's the deal with what happens to me. And probably when I'm singing jazz, I'm hearing in my head Billie Holiday and Ella, and so the way that they would deliver the pronunciation of certain words is probably just sort of subconsciously informing what I'm doing there, in a way that it doesn't if I'm just speaking to you about Attila the Hun, right? Because I'll hear those voices, they're part of the permanent jazz soundtrack that's in my head.
Yeah, my wife can do accents very well too. I can't, but it's interesting. When I was a kid, I was the only white kid in a mostly Spanish, Puerto Rican, and Colombian gang, and I spoke what was called Spanglish. I couldn't speak Spanish, but I spoke. But I couldn't do it around anyone else. I would only around those people. And then I was thinking too how when I read something, if I'm reading something that's really good, I can't read it that quickly, because I'm the alliteration, whether it's a poem, whether it's a great piece of prose, I can't read that quickly. But I find if I'm reading something that's a real piece of shit, it's like an airplane taking off. All of a sudden, I start reading whole paragraphs at a time. And it's like I can read whole block, and I can speed up 10, 12 times my normal reading pace if it's really crappy, because there's no resistance. It's like, there isn't resistance, and I can't do it consciously. It's one of those things that as I'm reading, I'll read, and 3 minutes later, I'm like, oh, I'm on page 27. I read, 9 pages a minute. And so that's interesting. Do you ever have that kind of thing as well, in outside of anything in the arts, like reading or, like I said, speaking another language, perhaps?
definitely with reading. Something like poetry, in which every syllable and every line, if it's well done and well crafted, you want to slow down because every syllable and line and the way they're combined and the thing that's happening in the syllables and in between them, there are so many layers there, and so you have to slow down because you realize, no, this is densely worked here. Even if it's 10 lines, these 10 lines are so beautifully constructed that you have to really dwell on it to get all of the things that are happening there. Whereas something that, I don't know, a how-to book, or something that's very prosaic and basic and sort of step by step, you can go through that very, very quickly, because it has a clear and predictable structure, and you can kind of scan through and pick up the main points and move on very rapidly. So yeah, I can relate to that. I don't know if I do paragraphs at once, but I definitely speed through texts like that at a much brisker pace than I will do for a piece of poetry, especially one that's, I mean, a good piece of poetry, as you say. If it's someone who's talking about the rain in Spain, that's not what I'm talking about.
Um, so, how familiar are you with other like contemporary jazz artists? And I'm not talking necessarily the big names or whatnot, because I mentioned before we started, uh, about 6 months ago, my wife and I were at a local winery in a town called San Saba here in Texas. My wife drinks wine. I'm not a drinker, so I'm the designated driver, just driving her around. And uh, I saw this Texas magazine about what was called progressive Western swing in outstate Texas, outside of the big cities. And it was these three sisters called the Quaby sisters, who were doing songs that you might have heard from the Grand Ole Opry in the 30s or 40s. But they three fiddlers, and their harmonies were so great. Um, and I was just wondering, because because swing music is a type of jazz. I was just wondering if you ever heard of progressive swing, or these Quaby sisters. They're in their 20s, 30s.
I think I came across the Quavey sisters maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago. Someone referred
Oh,
to them, and I looked them up because it rings a bell. These
yeah,
three girls with the fiddles, and they're
right.
sisters, and they do this sort of thing. I think I came across them at that point. Um, Swing. So swing is a definitely something that I have an affinity for. I used to be a major swing dancer actually as an undergraduate.
Oh,
So you'd go and you'd be dancing all night to swing, and a lot of it would be old school songs that had that swing rhythm. But a lot of the places would pick out more contemporary songs, like, I don't know, Crab in a Bucket or whatever, that are not, they're not old school jazz songs, but they have the right rhythm, so you can swing dance to them, and that was great.
yeah.
So um, I do love swing jazz, and I like jazz that has that quality to it. In terms of the contemporary scene, I think Canada actually has got a fair number of very good jazz singers, and even ones that come from Vancouver. I mean, just at the drop of a hat, I'm thinking about Diana Krall. I'm thinking about Lila Bialy. Um, there's
Frankly, I think you're better than Diana Krall, and nothing against Diana Krall, but I think, I mean, not that I'm a jazz aficionado, but when people have said, "Oh, listen to this," whatnot, I was more impressed with your stuff, and I'll tell you why. Is I think you have a wider purview musically than she does.
you mean in terms of like
you you
styles
you you
of
can
music?
mix in country. You can mix in that fugal water type thing. Whereas Diana Krall, to me, and I'm not saying she's a bad singer or anything, but I she does more of the standards, and I don't think she pushes herself as I've seen with you. And I'm not saying that simply. If she was sitting next to you, I'd say, Diana, I'm not kissing her ass because I hate you. But I just think that's so. That's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you, and one of the reasons I'm going to take this interview, and I'll see if I can interview the Quaby sister. I'll say, see, I did her right by her.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, but in terms of the scene, like there are names that are sort of well known, and Diana Krall is one of them. I think she's gone quite international. Um, but then there are these smaller groups like the Quavey sisters that you mentioned that do some absolutely fabulous stuff, but they're not household names. And so it's kind of an interesting moment in music in some ways, because on the one hand you have more of an explosion of what I'll call the independent music scene than ever before. just because the accessibility of production software and the way that musicians can use the internet to get their stuff out there makes it possible to reach people and build an audience in ways that hitherto, you know, before the last 10, 15 years were unheard of. You needed a production, a record label or a company to kind of get behind you and promote your stuff. So on the one hand, we've got that. On the other hand, anybody making money from music has gone dramatically downhill because you've got Spotify and streaming music services, and I'm not on Spotify. I'm on Spotify because that's the biggest go-to that people have when they want to listen to music on their phone. So if I want to reach people, which is fundamentally why I do what I do, then I need to be where they're going to go when they look for music. But Spotify pays artists nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about like 0.001 cents per stream of your song. Like, it's not even a penny.
Yeah.
Okay. So you put your music out there and somebody's making money off it. Spotify's making money off of people buying subscriptions to Spotify, but the people that are making the music get nothing. And so it does make it hard, I think, for independent musicians, because the idea of making a living from your art, it has become, I think, more inaccessible than it ever has been. So the audiences are more accessible, but the financial stability is pretty much non-existent.
And is that
So
mostly because of the record companies? Because in writing, it's for me the late '40s and the rise of MFA workshops. If you're not willing to tell someone that this song or this poem or this painting is not up to snuff, you're lying to someone. And I think when you have workshops that want to make all art just be about enhancing the self, while that might help the person, I've never seen it with a lot of people who've had issues in the arts, but it dumbs down society, and art to me is the highest expression of the human animal. Because, you know, what would aliens say if they found us 50,000 years after we went extinct? They would probably not care that we were smart enough to figure out the basics of universal laws, because any intelligent species could do that. But they sing. We don't have vocal cords like them. This is an interesting art form. And anyway, so is it really the record companies that you think are the villains?
I would tend to point the finger more at the streaming music platforms. I mean, people have been complaining about record companies giving artists a bad deal forever, and that's a legitimate concern, and I think that there's lots of things to be said about that. But I think that what's new is that even if you're independent, even if you don't have a record company or a label, your ability to make any kind of money from what you do has basically disappeared. I mean, it used to be that you could sell CDs. Like when I started in music 7 years ago, people were still making and selling CDs. It's a joke now. I mean, it's vanished in the past 7 years. People don't listen to CDs. They stream music on their phones. Yeah. So, if you wanted to sell, like directly as an artist to a fan, if I want to say, hey, I'm going to sell these CDs from my website, or I'm going to sell them from whatever other website, Bandcamp or whatever, you could do that. It's gone. So, in terms of a fan saying, I like your music, I want to support your music, let me buy your CD, it's over. And why is it over? It's because we're all on streaming music. And streaming music does not remunerate artists. Yeah. So I think that's been the game-changing thing in the last 7 years that's made it just much, much more difficult. And when artists talk, like when independent artists and musicians talk about, well, what do you do to get fans to support you? And you know what they say? They say, sell merch. What is merch? T-shirts. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not in this to sell you a T-shirt. Yeah. That is not what I'm here to do. Yeah. And I might make $5 by designing a cool T-shirt and selling it to you, but that's not where I want to spend my time and my energy. I want to spend it making music that I'm going to be proud of when I'm dying. And to be honest with you, I had one of these moments a couple of years ago, because I think all of us go through these cycles sometimes where you ask yourself, why are you doing this? You're spending your money, you're spending your time, you're putting this stuff out there in the world, you're not making any money from it, so why are you doing it, right? And you have to be able to answer this question satisfactorily every time it comes up. So I had this moment again a couple of years ago, and I was listening to a podcast by a guy called Jocko Willink, who's an ex SEAL, and I'm really a big fan of his. So he had this talk where he was like, you know, bad things happen. You need to be able to say good. And so I was doing this thought experiment about, you know, how far can I take that mantra in my life? You know, like to what extent can something terrible happen to me and I can say good? And so I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about, well, what if I went to the doctor and I found out that I've got 6 months to live because I've got terminal cancer? Like, put myself in that position mentally. Like, can I say good, like Jocko is going to say at this moment? And the first thought that came into my head, unbidden, was, boy, I'm glad I got those songs out into the world and they're not sitting on my computer somewhere.
Yeah.
And it just came out of nowhere. And it was just like, okay, you know what? That's why I'm doing it. It's because if you make something that you think is an authentic and hopefully a communicative reflection of something that is experienced in life, and I say communicative as the necessary addendum, because everyone says, I'm being authentic, I'm just speaking from my experience. That's great, and journals are good for that. But unless you can communicate to other people in a way that they can relate, and the song or the poem or whatever that you wrote can become theirs and become a vehicle for things they recognize. It has to communicate. So at least this is my criteria. So I was like, if I can make songs that are beautiful and that can communicate to other people, that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And if I make money from time to time, that would be great. But primarily, it's about communicating with other people, and it's about playing live for them. It's about people writing to me and saying, I love that song you did or that thing you wrote because, you know, it really speaks to me. That's what it's about. And it better be that's what it's about, because no one's going to be getting rich in this game, I think, the way it's set up right now.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting. I say this to all people who are artists, especially young people who say, I have to get out. As an artist, you're expressing something about yourself. If I write, I can send you a poem I called Al Capone Can Zone. The title is just too great to give up. But it's a poem about him being a real bastard. But obviously, if I wrote a poem about Al Capone, I had an interest in Al Capone in some way. But so that expresses something about me. I don't have to obsess about it. Art, I've always said, is more a verb than a noun. It's the how you communicate. You know, I can communicate and say, you know, oh, Eva, you know, and have a post say, Eva, I love your music. I'm a fan. But by talking to you and playing some clips and talking about the lyrics or whatnot, I can get a little bit more deeply into it. And hearing you talk about the CD thing and them going away, it made me think. I worked with a woman many years ago who was a big Ani DeFranco fan. You know Ani DeFranco? You know, she started her own record company back 25 some years ago. Well, I forget what it's called, Bad Girl Records or something. And she was hailed as not only artistically, but getting away from getting around the monopoly of the big record companies. And yet, from what you're saying with these streaming services, unless you were to have your own bandwidth, your own computer system to stream, even Ani DeFranco couldn't get started today.
I think it's really been a game changer, and I think there are a lot of people that are sort of, I mean, I see
it's like they want to keep you on the plantation.
Yeah, and everyone's trying to figure out, like, okay, the whole ground underneath us has just shifted, and the outcomes are all different, and the inputs are not getting us what we thought, and so now what, you know? And I think it's a moment where a lot of people are trying to figure out where it goes next, and I know that a lot of independent musicians are saying, don't be on Spotify, you know, direct your fans to Bandcamp and all that, and I understand where that comes from, but also, unless you're already into supporting independent music and you have a personal connection with somebody, nobody goes. I mean, very few people are going to go to Bandcamp at their first stop. So, you know, I understand where that strategy comes from, but I don't think it's a workable strategy. So it's hard, and I think it's really hard for people that depend on music for their livelihood. I don't have, the answers to that problem at this point, and
Yeah.
very few people I think do. It's very difficult.
An interview or two ago, I spoke with a young man who was a music react, and he's a budding wannabe musician. I was talking to him about several music sites, and one of them I mentioned was a fellow named Rick Beato. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He was a session musician, and he has maybe 1.5 million, 2 million followers, where he explains how to play music. He ranks the stuff, and he's actually gone to testify at Congress about music videos that he does that explain things and are clearly educational and not should be, not taken down or whatnot. He's actually going to testify for things to do that. But one of his videos recently, he was talking about, there was an article in, I think, the New Yorker or something, where some guy was talking about how Paul Simon sold his catalog for like $100 million or whatnot, and he was really ripping on Paul Simon as an over the hill musician, and that he won't be remembered in 200 years. And Beato did this video in reply. He's talking about, you won't know who's going to be around in 200 years, because 200 years ago, no one remembered Johann Sebastian Bach. He was only rediscovered in the 1830s, 200 years after he died. And that got me thinking, because my website, Cosmoetica, the written part, I mean, I've gotten over 1 billion in 21 years or 20 years now, over 1 billion people who come to it. Obviously it's a lot of the same people over and over again. But my videos, what I started in 2014, 15, I was behind the times in that. And people don't want to listen to an intelligent conversation for 2 hours or whatever it is between you and me, or me and a physicist or something. But I always say, there's a profession now called cyber historians who go back and look at stuff. And I think that in 50 or 100 years, when people look at the turn of this century, the turn of the millennium, they're going to have a radically different view of what was important in the arts and music. I think, you're more likely to be well known than, say, whoever might be the latest Disney girl who's got a cute song out. But it's sad. But that's one of the things I tell a lot of young artists, is that you have to do your art because you are trying to add something to this thing we call reality, not because you're going to get anything out of it. Now, I wish my wife and I could sell our books. We sell a few hundred books a year on Amazon, but obviously, we're not going to live on it. What is your take on the long view of art? I think I know what it is, but if you can just sort of crystallize it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about this just last week, because I attended a Vincent van Gogh exhibition.
Vincent. I'm sorry. You said Vincent van Gogh. I thought you said Vincent Price for a second. I said I interviewed Vincent Price's daughter. No, go ahead, Vincent van Gogh. I'm negatively capabling on you.
Well, before you went in, because it's a projection exhibition, so his paintings are projected enormously on these walls, and you're basically in the paintings, like you're surrounded by them. But before you go in there, you have to go through these series of billboards or placards that give you information about his life. So you kind of progress along this line of text on the wall that tells you about his life. And of course, I knew the outlines, but it had been a while since I revisited the particulars. And basically, what stood out from reading about his life was that anyone who knew him at the time, and probably he himself, would have ranked his life as a failure.
Yeah.
I mean, on every marker, he thought he would be a lay preacher. He was fired. He thought he was going to work in this print shop. He was sent away. I mean, it's a series of being fired and turned away, and then kind of living off of the support of family members, especially his brother, his parents being relieved that he left town, because it was kind of socially embarrassing. And then ending up in a mental asylum and committing suicide. So if you look at just the things that happened in his life, the events, the things he tried, and how his life ended at the age of 37, you'd say, well, this is a sad tale, and it's a tale of failure, until you look at the paintings. And he himself wrestled with this question of, artists many times being only credited and known after their death. That was something that Vincent van Gogh thought about.
Yeah.
And he himself became one of those very people. There was this really poignant thing that was written in the biography that Vincent van Gogh was in debt many times, but on this occasion, he was in debt and he couldn't pay back the man that he owed money to. So he brought a wheelbarrow full of his paintings. He actually brought a wheelbarrow full of his paintings to the door and said, "Look, I can't pay you, but you can have these paintings." And the creditor just scoffed at him,
Yeah,
and sent him away. But the creditor's wife said, "Well, at least you could have kept the wheelbarrow," you know. And this was the sort of utter devaluing that he experienced in his life, that people didn't care what he did, they didn't think it mattered. And he ends, you know, with this insane asylum and suicide. So yet when we look now at his art, it lives on far after his death, and it's better known than many of the other, quote, successful artists that he would be looking longingly at in galleries in his time.
Yeah.
And so I think that the measure of your success as an artist can't be financial, and it can't even be, you know, how many followers or likes or whatever it is you have in your lifetime. I think that good art is good because it captures something essential about the human condition. It frees some moment of that human. It can speak to other people.
Hold on, you're breaking
And so
up,
if it
Eva.
has that quality,
Eva, you're breaking up here. Hold on. Let me see. Oh, okay, now you came back. I'm sorry. You were you know freezing like a cubist painting there.
all right. Well, I was going to say that Van Gogh's art endures long after he died, and it endures over and above many of the other artists that would have been popular at his time, and he would have looked at longingly in the galleries. And I think that as an artist today, you can't measure your success in terms of financial compensation, and you can't measure it in terms of likes or followers or whatever it is. I think that your success has to be about the quality of what you do. And if you're doing the highest quality work that you can, it's work that you're proud of. If you succeed in capturing some aspect of the human condition and refracting it there, freezing it in a moment in your work of art, it's going to speak to other people later on because they're human and they can relate to that element of the human condition that you've somehow frozen for them.
Yeah.
And that's got to be what we aspire to. That's got to be what it's about. And great music does that. I mean, even centuries after it's been written, you can listen to a piece of music that's powerful, and it has an overpowering effect on your emotional state.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
that's what we're after.
I'm going to say two things that anyone who's ever listened to my videos has heard me say ad nauseum, but you haven't, so you're going to be a virgin to my wisdom here. One, I've always said that art is greater than science, and the reason I say so is if you removed Einstein, if you removed Thomas Edison, if you removed Newton, if you removed any great scientist, Darwin, the world would pretty much be the same. There was Alfred Russel Wallace who came up with the theory of evolution. There was Leibniz who came up with calculus along with Newton. So there's always someone working on it. But if you removed Herman Melville, there's no Moby Dick. And in an infinity minus one universes, there's never going to be a Moby Dick. If you remove Stanley Kubrick, no one's ever going to do 2001: A Space Odyssey. If you remove Beethoven, there go the symphonies. No one is going to do that. So in my mind, art is more essential in that sense because it's irreplaceable. And the second thing I wanted to say is when I think about art, I've told this to many young kids, is I'll go even beyond just the human condition and say that what would make art worth it for me is that if in 10,000 years, like 10 million light years away, some alien cruiser comes across, and tunes into whatever thing might be out there electronically and says, "Oh, here's a history of the Milky Way galaxy," or whatever they would call it, and on this ancient planet, there's an ancient human named Schneider, and he wrote this, and somehow it got translated, And that creature, who has no connection to the human condition, would say, how did he know that? Because I know that, I feel that, I understand that thing that this creature that's long dead wrote about or expressed. And to me, that's far greater immortality than just living forever, or at least it's a deeper one, I think. But so I did want to pick up on what you had said though about Van Gogh, because another thing that I've always thought with the arts is people take a lazy way out, and whenever some artist is the first or is perceived to be the first, whether they are or not the first in some area, a lot of more critical adoration ensues that overestimates that artist and underestimates some people who may have innovated later. And I'll give you some examples. You mentioned Shakespeare. I'd say Shakespeare is a good example, because I'll take the poems of John Donne over Shakespeare any day. I think Donne blows Shakespeare away. Another one is Charlie Chaplin, which I think Charlie Chaplin, certainly with silent films, have gone their way. But I think Chaplin is another one held up like that. Orson Welles. The Beatles are a good example of that. I think there are a lot of great British invasion Beatles bands, and I'm not saying anything against the Beatles. I think they were a great pop band, but I don't think that they were so much better than the Who or the Yardbirds or whatnot. And Emily Dickinson is another one for young women. I don't know if you ever heard of a poet, Hazel Hall, or Lorin Nidecker. These were women who have been. Hazel Hall was a crippled woman in, I think, Oregon back in the 1920s, or maybe Washington State, and she wrote she was trapped basically in her room until she died in her early 30s from some disease, and her stuff is very interesting. But Emily Dickinson fills the niche of the shy, not weirdo woman poet, and so Hazel Hall or other poets like that don't get it. The Beatles, they were the Fab Four. Well, everyone else is just imitating. Have you ever noticed that yourself, whether it's in music or in other arts too, that, and not to denigrate the people that are being praised, but it's a human nature that we jump on the bandwagon, the first ones.
Yeah, I think they sometimes call it like the first mover advantage.
I call it the founder's syndrome, but yeah.
Yeah, very, very, very similar. Is that the first person who kind of visibly does something, and I say visibly because they might not actually be the first person to do it. But you have exactly the same cat. I have a ginger one and a black one.
That's Zeus. This is Zeus. Good boy. Come on, bud.
But if you're the first person to kind of be recognized or seen to be doing something, then everyone attributes it to you, even if you actually heard it from somebody else. But you maybe happened to pick the right moment and you got the right platform to do that thing, and now it becomes your thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so everyone else says, "Oh, that's so and so," and anyone else who does that thing is just kind of a pale shadow. So it definitely happens. And I'm not sure what you can do about that, but I'm with you on John Donne. I mean, I think he's amazing, and some of his poems are just so absolutely brilliant in terms of the images and the construction. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. So let's get back to a couple more of your songs here as we head down the final lap here. One of my favorite songs of yours is "Hot Damn Romance," and I mentioned how in the Eurythmics song, how your phrasing was different than the original song, and to me that made it a bit more jazzy, plus the fact that it was a jazzier sound. But let me just play here a little bit of the "Hot Damn Romance" here. Hold on.
Came into my life like a bullet out of the blue. Snapped my head around before I could count to two. It's like there was a code someone gave to you, and I was helpless. You bring that hot damn romance, burning it down. It's like a high-speed flash dance in the ground. I can't believe what I found. How did you get so good?
So there, the phrasing, hot damn, you're going up the hill, and then there's a pause, and then boom, the romance sort of just bottoms out. With a phrasing like that, did something like that that's so noticeable in a song, was that one of the first sort of things was that sort of one of the things you hung the sheet of the song on, that boom, going over the hill kind of thing? Eva, are you there?
Whole seed of the song
Oh.
was that phrase,
Oh.
hot damn romance. And that was kind of where it all started. And it was the phrase, and it was the sound of it, and everything else just had to sort of fall into line around that. So absolutely.
And you use an interesting phrase, flash dance. I mean, that brings me back 40 years almost to that movie with the splashing of the water. Was that a reference directly to that?
Yes, that's exactly it.
And let's see, one other song I wanted to do here, and that my favorite song, and it's two songs here. Let me start with the one that I think one of the smartest songs lyrically is the Ribbons and Bows song. It's basically about a woman who's insecure, and she wants to wear stilettos, and she wants to get a boob job, and her boyfriend or her would-be admirer is saying, if it makes you happy, but you don't have to do it for me. Is that just sort of a fun song that came to you, or someone suggested to you? Or?
Yeah, that's one of those ones where you kind of look out at what's going on with people, and you imagine these two characters and what they say to each other, and they kind of embody these two different ways of looking at things. I'm so glad you brought that one up, because it was such a fun song. I had a lot of laughs writing it, and it's not one that I think gets a lot of airplay. Like, I don't think a lot of people know it's out there, but it's funny because I actually have a couple of daughters, and when I wrote that song, they loved it. Like, they thought it was super catchy, and they were running around singing it. And I thought, well, if it's an earworm for smaller people, it's probably a good sign that it's sticky, But that's exactly it. Is that it's about this sort of fixation with the exterior, and I think that women are really encouraged in that direction, and maybe feel inadequate if they don't. And the song is really about just saying, look, that's not the point, and that's not what matters most, and it's not where you should be spending all like inordinate amounts of time and energy and mental bandwidth. And it's something that I think is more relevant now even than when I wrote it, although I wrote it not that long ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. But I think especially with Instagram and the way kids are on there, they're being presented with increasingly bizarre images of the female form. And they're bizarre because they're an accretion of all kinds of cosmetic surgery, plus filters, plus photoshopping and airbrushing. And so the final image that gets put out there often bears little resemblance to the actual person that it purports to represent. And yet, when you look at Instagram, it lies to you, because Instagram has the sense of, oh, it's just a selfie. It's just the immediacy, the intimacy of someone snapping an image on their phone. But so that's the promise, but that's not what you're getting in a lot of cases. And I think that a lot of, especially developing young women, girls that are in their adolescence, are beginning to become aware of their bodies and their appearances, and they're measuring themselves against these increasingly bizarre ideals of beauty. And they're saying, well, I don't look like that, my buttocks and my breasts and my face and my nose and my lips, don't resemble that. But if that's what's beautiful, I mean, if that photo has 30,000 likes or whatever, then I guess there must be something wrong with me, and maybe I better go and do that. And it's I actually hear my students talking about this, because some of them, one of the essay topics that I often give them is cosmetic surgery. And so invariably, there are girls that pick this topic, and they express an opinion on whether it's advisable or a bad idea. And they do some research and so on. And I've seen a shift towards more and more of them saying that it's a great idea. It will bring you romantic fulfillment and career success and all these things. And I just think, good grief, you know. I mean, it's ultimately all window dressing, and it all has a very short shelf life. And that's not who you are. So if that's where you're going to spend all your energy, what are the things you're not developing? You know, it's really kind of disturbing to me. So that's where it's going.
Yeah, this is one of the problems I have with identity art. For those people who can't see me, I have a big bandage on my face. A couple of days ago, I had a lethal carcinoma on my face, a little cancer that got scooped. And I was talking with the dermatologist who was doing it, and he was talking about how I probably got this just from the driver's side window of my car over 40 years of driving. But I was saying, you know, it's odd how many people go to tanning salons. White people want to look darker. Black people want to peel their skin. In Korea, girls by the millions have gotten their epicanthic folds removed to look more Western. And it's like, what are you? When I think of myself, I mean, now someone would say, well, I'm a white male, but I'm not rich. I work for, I'm a working class guy. But, you know, I don't look at myself, oh, I'm male because I have a penis. I'm white because I have pale skin. I'm this, that, or the other. To me, if you asked me if that alien that I mentioned before came in, I'd say I'm an artist. I'm an artist who happens to be a Homo sapiens. And I see Homo sapiens, intelligence. So many people denigrate being intelligent because it's easy to say, well, I feel this. It's great to feel something, but what makes you you is your intelligence. Because I've said, if you have a tearjerker movie like that Shirley MacLaine movie from the early 80s, I forget the name of it, but it's a famous tearjerker. You might be moved the first time, but the second time you're not going to be crying about it. But if you are moved in a deep fashion, or if you intelligently get something, let's say like 2001: A Space Odyssey, you're going to come back to that. And what hits the mind always goes down to the emotion, because people don't realize it. The emotions are part of the mind. They're not separated. But there I go preaching again. But I wanted to play my favorite song of yours, and I want to pause it at a really good portion, and it's not that far in. And I want to see if just in this hour and a half or so we've been talking, if you can understand, or if you can take a guess at what I'm going to say makes that an excellent lyric. So I'm gonna quiz you on your own song here. So it's
you have to read the lyrics back to me, because
I will. Okay.
When you're playing the music.
Well, let me play it first, and then I'll read it. Okay, so here we go. This is Saying Goodbye.
When my time to go comes, I'll miss the rain that falls fragrant on the earth and brings it again.
Okay, first off, there's the Canadian. It sounds like fragrant rather than fragrant. But okay, so when my time to go comes, I'll miss the rain that falls fragrant on the earth and greens it again. So what do you think I'm going to say is why that's a great sequence of words? But lyrics.
I think the falls fragrant on the earth is probably maybe what you might focus on, because it's an unexpected word order, and there is the alliteration of the F sound. Yeah. Almost there, falls fragrant on the earth and greens it again. And the use of greens as a verb as well, in that sense, is less conventional.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I would say make it maybe unusual, but I'm curious to see what you focused on.
Well,
it might be something totally different.
I focused on falls fragrant, but the alliteration assonance is there. But because it's also synesthetic, it's the mixing, the falling, the act of motion, engaging the sense of smell. So right there is something that, in just picking those words, whether you did that intuitively or not, that whether it's the undermined or the overmined, that's telling me this person knows how to write a good lyric. And so the reason I point to some of these out is that if someone in Canada or whatnot, or in Italy or wherever is watching this, they'll know that you're not just another pretty face, and you're not just another good singer. There's also creativity, because there's a difference between performing art. There are people who can be good singers. I think of like Karen Carpenter, or Judy Garland, who I think was one of the most talented performing artists of all time. But there is also a creative part of you that goes along hand in hand with that. And so that's, for those people who can't get that, I want them to know this is what I'm seeing and hearing when I'm hearing the song and then seeing the lyrics there. But it's interesting that you picked up on the more literary aspect, whereas I picked up on the more, I guess, scientific, synesthetic, psychological aspect of it. But I have to say, I really enjoyed interviewing you. Is there anything I've missed that you just like to say about yourself or your art? Or what are you working on next? Is there another EP or LP or whatever you call it?
Yes, there is actually. So there are two things. Today, I'm actually launching episode 1 of a new series on the History podcast, Villains and Virgins, and this series is on the Amazons. And so it's a fascinating thing. I've been really deep in the research on it in the past couple of months, because it overturns a lot of assumptions we've made about how ancient cultures on the steppe functioned. And there's some really fascinating examples of European archaeologists bringing their own preconceptions about gender roles into grave excavation and getting it wrong. So anyway, it's a fascinating series, and the first episode of that I'm going to release actually today. So there's that.
Okay.
But on the music front, I'm actually working on my 4th collection of songs right now. COVID permitting, the plan is to fly into Toronto probably in July and record with the same producer and many of the same musicians that worked on my last EP, which you were sampling, the Hot Damn Romance and Water. Those are the guys that worked with me on those songs, and I had a really fabulous experience with them. So working with the same crew on a new collection of songs as we speak. We're actually in talks every week with various stages of development, working on the tracks and getting the arrangements down. So that's what's going on, and it's really exciting. There's nothing that replaces that enthusiasm you have when you're bringing something from art that you just kind of did at home that no one knows about to fleshing it out and bringing it into fulfillment as an object out there in the world for other people. And that's the stage we're at. So I'm enjoying the journey.
I did a trio of plays on Sargon the Great, Cyrus the Great, and Alexander the Great. And I've done 2 shows, interview shows on Alexander and Cyrus, but since Sargon is the oldest of them, it's harder to find anyone. Have you ever done anything or research anything about Sargon of Akkad or Sargon the Great? Not the British guy with the website, but
yeah, no, I in passing, like some of his. It's actually a private joke in the house here, because I don't know if I should go there. There's a kind of an enthusiasm for our own interpretations of ancient peoples. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of neo-paganism and there's neo-druidism, and people have their own ideas of what pre-Christian societies were like, and they kind of have this enthusiasm for the image that they have of these people and their beliefs, which is often significantly impaired in terms of the historical detail. And if some of those historical details were filled in, you might not be quite as enthusiastic about some of these people. But anyway, Sargon is great because he has these incredible statements of just like who he annihilated and who he demolished. And I think it was Dan Carlin, the kind of the Godfather of History podcast, who makes the comparison and says, what Hitler did was just simply in the wrong period of time, because we've reached a point in our civilizations where we don't glorify the massive like murder on a large scale and say this is something to boast about, like look how great I am. But that's exactly what Sargon is doing, and that's exactly what conquering rulers at that time would do. They'd say, look at all these people that I butchered, look at the cities that I laid waste, look at all these things that I destroyed, see how great I am, and tremble. You know, and Sargon very much encapsulates that kind of attitude. So he's a very fascinating figure. But I think that our sensibilities on these things have shifted significantly.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you knew anything, because I'm trying to get some Sargon experts, but they're few and far between, and a lot of people camera shy. But anyway, so I want to thank you, and I didn't mention, but EvaSchubert.com is your website. I would encourage people to go there, and you also, I'll link to that as well as your YouTube page. It's really very pleasurable to chat with you. I was just thinking as I was going to wrap this up. I think two other women that I've interviewed, I really enjoyed as much as you, and they're all Canadians for some reason. One is an actress named Kathleen Gaddy. I don't know if you ever heard of her. She's a semi-regular on a soap opera here in the U.S. I interviewed her a few years ago. She was terrific. And then another one was a woman named Michelle Green, who used to be on L.A. Law, and I think she was Canadian. I think she said she was from Canada too. So there's something about, I bring out the best in Canadian women.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it as well, Dan. It was lovely. It was a conversation that ranged into a lot of interesting places. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.